Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another lecture here from History 319. And what we're looking at for the first part of this week is basically going to be America's experience in World War One. And I've got a little bit of a problem going into this. I absolutely love dealing with First World War to the point that I'm afraid to get into too much depth because we'll spend too much time there. So here's what I'm going to do. Instead of involving a tremendous amount of reading, I've got several videos and a couple of lectures that I want you to look at. We're going to do this one right here, which is America's Entry. I've got another one that you may have already seen on trench warfare, simply because I can't let it go without that. Then there's another one, which is a lecture at the National World War I Museum by Dr. Michael Nyberg. And Mike is an old buddy of mine. He and I have presented together over the years. And he is my go-to guy when it comes to the First World War. He's forgotten more about it than I'm going to ever know. And you will see a Dr. Gary Armstrong from William Jewell College out in Kansas who's also referenced in this. So it's always nice to have resources and friends that are much smarter than you are when it goes into it. But anyway, so we want to look at this American entry, and what I've subtitled this is Wilson and America on the World Stage. And so as we go along, there's a problem. And the problem is that the world goes to the devil in a handbasket in late August of 1914. And for a couple of years, America is able to stay out of this. But by the spring of 1917, that's no longer possible, or at least it doesn't appear so. So the first one, you see here, by 1917, we're caught up in those events that are running rampant. We're talking a type of war that no one has ever seen before. And if this was a class on the world in the 20th century, we would spend a good bit of time here. But since it's not, it's an American history one. And so what it is Europe is caught up in these events, and we're getting sucked into the vortex of it. And secondly, both sides want to pull America in. By this point in the 20th century, America is a recognized industrial powerhouse, quite possibly the strongest industrial powerhouse in the world, and an incredible depth of population, military-aged population. And so both sides want us to pull us in and get on their side. And so it's like, okay, kind of like being a free agent in the NFL. But, America's going to protest being neutral. But what's going to happen is there's this old saying, if you want to know the real answer, you follow the money. And if you follow the money's not going to Germany. It's not going to Kaiser Wilhelm. It's going to the Allies. It's going to the French. It's going to the British. It's going to those places right there. And so what's happened is that money is going to them. And you know what? You know good and well you're not going to loan somebody money you don't think you're going to get it back from, which means we have a vested interest. We, being America, have a vested interest in seeing this thing to be, if not a victory for the Allies, at least not an abject defeat. And that's going to what I've called here turn Germany off. And also in America and in Western Europe, Germany is going to be seen as violating the freedom of the seas. That whole U-boat mess, that was pioneered first with the Turtle during the American Revolution, and then later with the H.L. Hunley in Charleston during the American Civil War. Germany's going to take it to the height of, or state of the art, so to speak. They are the ones, and that we see in America as violating the freedom of the seas because they're relatively sneaky. And this is a covert war on America, so we think. And so for every ship they sink that has Americans on it or American stuff on it, we're like, look at the Germans doing something again. Then it's always about politics. And you go to the 1916 election, and Woodrow Wilson, who got in 1912 because the Republican Party split, is going to win a slim. And notice it says SLIM in big letters, victory. And one of the phrases he used, not what necessarily caused him to win it, but it didn't hurt. He kept us out of war. Teddy Roosevelt had been wanting America to jump in. You had what we may call some jingos, or these ardent nationalists that want America to jump in and get a part in this. And Wilson's going, no, 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 no. We don't want no part of it. We don't have a hand in this. We don't, or as we say in Cleveland County sometimes, we don't have a dog in that fight. But it's inching ever closer. So there's a thing here. What I want you to start to think is, if you were Wilson, what would you do? And it's kind of hard because we know what he does. But if you're in his situation in 1916, 1917, what do you do? And I don't want any part of that decision making tree that he. So, what are some of the events that lead up to this? There's another video that I have, uploaded for you that is about a 20-minute overview of World War One. Besides the guy's odd little accent, it's pretty good. It is a pretty good overview. But there's a couple of things. So let's talk about that sick old man of Europe, being the Ottoman Empire. It creates a power vacuum or a political vacuum in the Baltic region there. So just kind of like we had back in the late 90s. So it creates that power vacuum, and everybody wants to fill it. I mean, especially the Austro-Hungarian Empire says, ho, 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 we want to go down there into the Balkans and bam, grab that up, bring that into our empire. But it's a crappy little empire that they've got, and it is rotten from the inside out. And so when you get them and the Russians vying for this same area, you've got a mess on your hands. And that's what I'm talking about, that power of balance. Listen to me, I can't even talk today. That pre-war balance of power is very precarious. It's one of those, Germany sitting in the middle of Europe has enemies to the east, enemies to the west. You've got the Russians in the east, you've got the French in the west, you've got the British just across their little channel with their big old gigantic navy, and you've got the Italians down there, and you don't want them on your side before, during, or after a war. It's a bunch that hadn't won a war since Julius Caesar. So it's very precarious how they have to ally themselves. The Austro-Hungarians latch on to the Germans because the Germans are incredibly powerful. The Germans latch on to the Austro-Hungarians because they need an ally. Then you've got the British and the French who have an entente, and they bring the Russians in because, hey, you want the big giant Russians so they can be allowed here to kind of stave off some of the German power. So you've got a little bit of a mess. And then the crown prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, old Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie, who by all measures were decent people. They go to Sarajevo because Sophie was a commoner. She could not be seen at a state function inside the empire. So they go to Sarajevo, and where the Black Hand, a pan-Slavic nationalist, wants to bring all of the Slavic countries under one roof, says, if you come, we're going to kill you. And they do, and it leads to a whole host of problems, even though Franz Joseph, the emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, did not like his nephew, thought him a bit of a goofball. But now it's an excuse to set the alliance system in motion. It's like, hey, you know what? We're going to take care of business. We're going to annex this little area. And Kaiser Wilhelm is on his yacht in the North Sea, can't be bothered. And when Austrian send him a telegram, says, hey, we're thinking about doing this, not necessarily invading, but we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we may end up invading, down this way. He's like, sure, whatever, do what you want to, and sends it off a telegram. It's almost like a blank check. Sometimes it's called the blank check telegram. And it's like, okay, so now let's prime this alliance system. So if Franz Joseph invades down there in Sarajevo, what in the devil? Russia's already said, no, 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 no. These people are our historical brethren, and if you fight them, then you're going to fight us too. And now this whole alliance system is set in motion. Okay, and it's so Germany's the one who's going to precipitate the war. Germany's not even involved. The Kaiser's been sitting out there swimming in the ocean. Too bad he didn't get eaten by a shark. But so what happens is Germany has a plan. It's called the Schlieffen Plan, Albert von Schlieffen, and the idea is we're going to knock out our biggest enemy first, which is France, and then we'll deal with our weaker enemy, which is Russia, later. It is this entirely complicated timetables, and oh my goodness, and then they mess with it. It's like, as an old football coach myself, every play is designed to score a touchdown, but every play doesn't. You just, I don't know if any of y'all saw Cam Newton and the Patriots play today. Woo, a little rough for old Cam, got set on the bench. The timetable is too complicated, the plans are too complicated, and it doesn't work. And the French and the British are able to stop them on the banks of the Marne River, and all of a sudden, that Western Front bogs down into trench warfare, which there is another lecture on. Now, in the meantime, from 1914, 15, 16, and early 17, when I say Russia suffers horrendous losses, we have no clue how many millions. We still don't to this day. So there is ungodly what goes on with them. And so what you get is a war that we thought, that the actors of the day thought would be a good little war. It's going to fix some problems in the empires. I mean, we laugh at that today, but they thought that was the case. Everybody wanted a war, but nobody wanted the war that they got. And it becomes this titanic struggle. It becomes economy versus economy, society versus society, army versus army, and it is an all-out effort, and America wants no part of this. But by the spring of 1917, Russia is on the verge of collapse. The Tsar Nicholas II, who happens to just be the Kaiser's cousin, he has abdicated the throne. He has left power. Alexander Kerensky comes in as the head of the provisional government, and a guy named Vladimir Lenin is just waiting in the wings. And so eventually what's going to happen is Vladimir Lenin is going to come in. We know that the Bolsheviks do take over Russia. And so now all of a sudden, one of the great powers is taken out of the contest. And we can see this thing teetering on that verge, even from across the ocean. And so, man, you've got Russia on the verge of collapse. You've got this titanic struggle. You've got all this junk going on. You've got there is no other way to call it but a meat grinder where these offenses have gotten nowhere. Like the Battle of Verdun, between killed and wounded, may have 1 million casualties. 1 million. The single bloodiest day in American history was September 17th, 1862, along the banks of the Antietam Creek near Sharpsburg. And you have 23,000 men getting killed or wounded in that day in about 8 hours of fighting. That would be the first morning, and I'm saying morning after tea, before lunch, a couple of hours section at the Battle of Verdun. It is that bad, okay, and are leading nowhere. And so what you get is people on the verge of exhaustion. Which can handle it the longest? Russia's ready to bow out, and they're going to. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, once the Bolsheviks take over, they are going to bow out. The French are almost to the point they're needing to bow out. The British are to the point they don't want to send any more soldiers over. Germany their armies are on their last legs, though we don't know it at the time. And this whole thing in 1917, and America of neutral. And so you can see some of this from Wilson's declaration about every man who really loves America. Sounds like a good politician there, right? That you're going to do this, and that the people of the United States are drawn from all these countries, and we were and we still are, okay? And it said, all these different sympathies, okay? So we've got that going on. We don't want in on it. We're drawn from these countries. We don't want divisions among us that are fatal to our peace. He said, we don't want any part of this. It's not our fight. Y'all go have fun. But this next bullet has the core of what we need to understand, where it says that the U.S. must be neutral in fact as well as in name. That's pretty clear. We've got to actually be neutral, not just say we are. And look what he's got here: during these days that are to try men's souls. Well, that goes back to the American Revolution, where these are the times that try men's souls, where the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot, blah, 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 blah. So there we go. We go all the way back to Thomas Paine. And so he's going to say neutral in fact as well as in name. But Wilson's a politician, and Wilson also is in charge of what we would, an industrial, almost superpower that is getting inevitably sucked in like he's going into quicksand or into one of those black holes in outer space. So what have we got are his stated war aims? Well, we ain't even got in yet. But when this thing breaks out, he says, just like we saw, we have to be neutral in fact as well as in name. Okay, good enough. But by April of 1916, that has changed. And he's going to issue Germany an ultimatum on their unrestricted U-boat warfare, where he says, you got to stop this. You have sunk all these ships, including the Lusitania, that I'm sure your books talks about. But you've got to stop, or we're going to have to get involved. And that scares the absolute bejesus out of Germany. And for a little while, they stop. But then as Russia begins to teeter, Germany has got this calculation in their head. Can we knock France out of the war and get a peace, get them to sign an armistice, hold on to part of our gains before America can come over. And folks, it is a dangerous little gamble, but it's one they're getting ready to have to take. But by February 1917, he's going, you know what? In this war, there needs to be peace without victory. That one side does not need to beat the other down, because if we do that, if we beat that other side down, and we're going to see that in just a second in his own words, if we do that, then it's going to lead to some lasting enmity, and somebody's going to want revenge. Well, isn't he a smart guy, knowing what comes with a little guy by the name of Adolf Hitler? Then in April 1917, there's a change. Now, instead of peace without victory and neutral in fact, there's this idea that we've got to make the world safe for democracy, that this world is no longer safe. And that's going to be part of his war aim. And then, well after February 1918, America's been in this thing for a while. We've been in it 10 months. And he's going to issue something called the 14 Points. And we'll look at those in a minute. In terms of peace without victory, look at that. Late January 1917, you know, you can read the King's English there, but we've got to have that. We don't want to be misinterpreted. We don't want to crush our antagonist, because if we do, you know, some bad stuff's going to happen. That's what he's going to say. Peace forced upon the loser, a victor's terms imposed upon the vanquished, or what the Germans will call later a diktat. It be accepted in humiliation, under duress, and an intolerable sacrifice. Folks, Woodrow Wilson is not my favorite individual, but Woodrow Wilson's right. This is what's going to happen in 1919. He says only a peace between equals can last. Okay? So, we'll move along here for just a minute. And he talks about how peace cannot be had without concession and sacrifice. Meaning, you ain't get all you want. If you got all you want, that's going to be that diktat. But then the Germans are going to have that calculation, and they're going to miscalculate. They're going to send this thing here. Now, to us today, we look at it, it says Mexico City, and then charge German embassy. And we look at it late January 1917, via Galveston, Western Union telegram. What is this? This is a secret letter or a secret telegram from the Germans to the Mexicans saying, listen, we need you to keep America in check. And people look at it and think, huh, what the devil? Well, if you remember back from your history class in high school, America took a great chunk of Mexican territory during the Mexican-American War. And the Germans are playing on this idea that, hey, you might get it back. And said, if you fight America, and if you do this, that, and the other, when the war is over and the peace is settled, we're going to make sure you get it back. Now, did they have any intention of that? I don't know. But it was designed to keep America busy and not involved in the war in Europe. Well, you know what? The British intercept the full thing. And if you want people to spy for you, you want the British to do it. And I don't mean James Bond. Those guys can crack a code and cook and hatch a scheme like nobody's business. And when they find this, they're like, oh, bully, here we go. And they get it to America. And as you can imagine, the American public is incredibly outraged.